Welcome to the Grazing Grass Podcast, episode 81.
Make sure you've got money in the reserve because you're gonna need it, especially if you're truly gonna be going down the regenerative journey. Because it's not like you're gonna have perfect finishing quality pasture the first season. It's gonna take 4 or 5 years in order to start being able to finish on that. At least that's my experience. So be patient. Be patient.
You're listening to the Grazing Grass Podcast, helping grass farmers learn from grass farmers. And every episode features a grass farmer and their operation. I'm your host, Cal Hardage. You're growing more than grass. You're growing a healthier ecosystem to help your cattle thrive in their environment. You're growing your livelihood by increasing your carrying capacity and reducing your operating costs. You're growing stronger communities and a legacy to last generations. The grazing management decisions you make today impact everything from the soil beneath your feet to the community all around you. That's why the Noble Research Institute created their Essentials of Regenerative Grazing course to teach ranchers like you easy-to-follow techniques to quickly assess your forage production and infrastructure capacity in order to begin grazing more efficiently. Together, they can help you grow not only a healthier operation, but a legacy that lasts. Learn more on their website at noble.org/grazing. It's noble.org/grazing. Be sure and listen in the upcoming events for grazing courses coming near you. When I think about Long Island, New York, I don't think about grazing. I don't think about farms. But today, we have a guest from Long Island, New York. Stephen Skrenta does grass-fed beef and lamb, as well as some other things that he's got going on. He's in a challenging environment of Long Island. You know the land's not cheap there. Plus, how he started with 20 acres and what he's doing now. I think it's a great episode, and it will surprise you a little bit. At least it did me, because when I think about Long Island, like I said, I don't think about grazing. It's a great episode. I think you'll enjoy it. Before we talk to Stephen, 10 seconds about my farm. So, quite a few episodes ago, I talked about my plan for my cows, that I put the bulls out there and I was not pulling them early because, in my opinion, a bred cow is worth more than an open cow. It really depends on your market and what you're doing there. And I had the thought or plan I was not going to preg check my cows. In the past, we always do the bioprine blood pregnancy test. Super easy to pull the blood and then send it off to get tested. The biggest drawback is you've got a week or 2 weeks to wait to find the results. But you can test much earlier than if you're palpating. So 28 days post-breeding, you can find out if they're pregnant. As it started cooling down and I started counting hay bales to see how much I had, looking at my pastures, how much grazing I have to make it through winter, how things are going, I thought it was a wise idea to go ahead and preg check my cows. And that will let me make some decisions on, do I keep them through winter? Do I not? Obviously, if they're bred, calf on the ground, they're sticking around. Well, I say that. I also weighed calves and estimated weaning weights, and I've got some couple cows that just are not producing much compared to their body weight. Cow efficiency, if you will. I like looking at the weight of their calf compared to the cow's mature size. So I'm looking forward to getting that back. I should have it back before next week's episode. I'll give you an update and let you know if I'm happy or sad. Sure, it'll be good. Let's talk to Stephen. Stephen, we want to welcome you to the Grazing Grass Podcast. We're excited you're here today.
Thank you, Cal. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the invitation.
Stephen, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your operation?
we started our farm, Acabonac Farms, in 2015. We're based on Eastern Long Island, New York, which is not necessarily known as an agricultural sector of New York, although the history of Long Island absolutely includes a fair amount of agriculture, in particular potato farms. Today, we have a lot of vineyards, Eastern Long Island, as well as sod farms, and a small but growing number of livestock producers, just like Acabonac. We raise grass-fed, 100% grass-fed and finished beef, pastured lamb, pork, and chicken on the farm. And we sell all those products direct to the consumer over our website, and then we also have a wholesale business that we run to supply local restaurants and butcher stores and such.
All right, very good. You have a lot of things going on there. The first thing that jumps out at me, Long Island. I don't think Long Island and think of grass-fed beef, lamb, or anything.
Well, yeah, you're right, and pretty much nobody else does as well. Maybe with the exception of me, but also perhaps, Cal, maybe that is the opportunity. If you think about it, our most western farm is about 50 miles outside of New York City, and a lot closer to some other big food areas, Brooklyn, Queens. We're very close to Westchester, and of course, our backyard is Nassau and Suffolk counties in Long Island. Quite a few consumers, and many of them are looking for locally raised proteins.
Now, how big is Long Island?
So if you were to draw, so it's very difficult to say, right? Because the traffic in and around New York City really can distort things. But let's say there's no traffic. You can drive from New York City to the end of Long Island in about 2 hours. We're towards the end of Long Island, heading east. Long Island is bordered by Long Island Sound. On the other side would be Connecticut, and then the Atlantic Ocean.
Oh, very good. So that results in pretty mild weather, I would assume, for the most part.
Yeah, it's a great place to have pastures. Despite New Yorkers complaining constantly about the weather, it's not that. We do get a fair amount of humidity in the summer, and we tend to have some days that are well into the 90s, but for the most part, it's fairly temperate. The winters are reasonable. We do get snow, of course, but it melts within a day or two, so it's really very reasonable. The downside to it is that we're on sandy soils, and that makes it a challenge. And in fact, that's been a challenge for the business for the since we've started. And this past winter, we made the investment and started irrigating our largest farm, which was a big undertaking.
Very good, very good. Now, you started, I think you said, in 2015. Did you grow up in agriculture? What brought you to agriculture?
No, not at all. My background is in finance. That's where the first part of my professional career was in New York City, and half the time in New York City, and then the other half of the years in London. And when my wife decided it was time to come back from Europe, we moved to our home on Eastern Long Island, and just commuting into New York City wasn't of interest anymore for me. And I realized that I needed something to do, and I wanted a challenge, but I also wanted something that I didn't, that would be a learning experience and ultimately good for the environment. And that's when I started developing the business of Acabonac Farms.
When did you decide, we're doing agriculture? And when you decided to get cattle, well, actually, I don't want to assume that. What did you get first?
So the first, and up until, really a year or two ago, it was only grass-fed beef. And so that's where, it was, for whatever reason, it's not necessarily the most profitable product, compared to the other proteins. It was the one that I was, for whatever reason, most interested in.
Oh, yeah.
And so, we started with grass-fed beef. from day one. And it's our biggest product. We introduced pasture pork, lamb, and chicken. We sort of piloted the three new proteins over the last year or two, and then we went into full scale, I would say, production on those three new ones, the pork, lamb, and chicken this season.
So when you got your cattle, what did you have in way of land to run cattle?
The land on Eastern Long Island, even agricultural land, is very, very expensive. It's prohibitively expensive. I mean, you wouldn't be able to make a positive return on a farming operation if you were to go and purchase the land. And so we started and still do lease all of the farms that we graze. And we started, which wasn't easy, by the way, because, of course, landowners, all of which were farmers, clearly knew that I didn't have any experience in this. So that was a big challenge, right? You really needed to do some convincing in order to get farmers to lease us their land. Well, now we don't have a problem with it at all. In fact, we get a lot of calls every season to take over larger properties, in particular those that don't want to put their properties into sod production. Typically, we'll get the call. We started with 20 acres, and then we started leasing. Now we have close to 300 or so acres that we're grazing. Not all in pasture. Some of that acreage is in woods, but we still pasture the cattle, and in particular the pastured pigs spend most of their time in silvo pasture.
And is all your acres there on Long Island?
Yeah, they're all Long Island. That's the good news. The bad news is that they're not adjacent to each other necessarily, and so logistics and moving ourselves and our equipment as well as the animals around through rotation, not only on the farm but throughout the farms. So that's part of what we had to develop that may have been a bit unique to our operation. Perhaps others do it as well, I'm sure. But when you're so close to New York City, you can't get 500 contiguous acres. It really doesn't exist.
Oh yeah. You got that 20 acres. You went and bought some cows, some stockers. What was your process there?
We spent one of the things that we had to do, because the labor rates are very expensive on Long Island, as you probably can imagine. Also, there's no expertise in terms of livestock east of Long Island. So it wasn't like I could go to a neighbor and ask, how do I put together a high tensile fence, or what do I use for stock water, or what do I seed my fields, my pastures with? So early on there was a lot of learning, and that thankfully I was able to do with a few really amazing people that didn't necessarily live nearby, but were very generous with their time and knowledge. And then we had to start doing everything by ourselves. We couldn't make a return on the investment if we were going to bring in people to build our fences or to develop our stock water, or even drill a well. It's just the margins aren't. So we had to do it all ourselves, and which we did. And also that was part of the excitement. It was getting it all together ourselves. We made a lot of mistakes, obviously, but we got our fences together, we got stock water together. We leaned heavily on a few, as I said, mentors in order to guide us. And then Craig, when we it's a little bit different when cattle get out. Although thankfully this hasn't happened, but it would be a little bit different, right, if cattle get out on Long Island, New York, versus in, say, a more rural area, upstate New York or Montana or Wyoming or something like that. So the community, our neighbors, I would imagine at least they wouldn't know what to do. Right? It would be extraordinary if that were to happen. So we do have to be very, very careful.
One thing that's brought up quite often with animals is to have animals that are locally adapted. But it sounds like you probably weren't able to get very many animals from Long Island. You had to go off the island to get cattle.
Yeah, we source none of feeders that we buy from Long Island. We start, it's funny how when the business grows, right, your sort of approach to things changes drastically. So in the early days, if we were going and driving for a few hours, let's say to upstate New York and buying 5 steers or heifers, right, because we thought they were the perfect genetics and the perfect phenotypes and stuff. That was sort of like a big deal, but we just, now we can't do that, right? We just don't have enough time in order. So now, we have to move into some bigger markets where we could find, the right genetics that were not only, used to our weather conditions on Long Island, which is not that hard actually, but also the forage sequences that we use, because we're primarily in the finishing stage when we're talking about cattle. We're in the finishing stage of the animal's life, and so the levels of energy that the animal is coming off of versus coming on to when they get to our farms needs to be fairly consistent, because we don't want to have periods where they're not gaining weight.
So it sounds like sourcing animals was somewhat of a challenge. Has it gotten, you mentioned there about numbers, but overall, has it gotten easier by building contacts, or do you still have a lot of issues with sourcing animals?
I would say that second to labor, it was the most challenging, and it continues to be the most challenging. And I think people that come and see the operation underestimate how much time I, in particular, may spend on the road meeting with other livestock producers. Not necessarily because we can't find the right genetics, and speaking openly, it's quite difficult to find people that are trustworthy, and that's an unfortunate aspect in the business that I wasn't aware of, and made some costly mistakes. Right, not everybody is as genuine as you know.
Right, it'd make it a lot easier if you could take everyone's word at face value.
Yeah, and I think it works both ways too, because there's a little bit of concern, obviously, about my performance. Not, it's not like I have a history in the business, and I probably still don't, but in the early years, I wasn't coming across as particularly knowledgeable. I was able to repeat what certain people were telling me, and I thought I knew, and sometimes I got lucky, and sometimes I didn't, in terms of actually selecting the animals that would work for the operation and what we're doing fiction. But I think I'm a little bit better at it now, but it's something that I spend a lot of time working on. There are some deeper markets down south, right south of us. So as you move into as you move into Pennsylvania, and then you move into West Virginia, then you're able to start to find herds big enough to fill punt loads with correct genetics, which is what we're looking for now.
Very good. And I hate to show my ignorance here, but I am. How far is it from you to Pennsylvania?
Yeah, so again, without traffic, you could be in Pennsylvania within 2.5 hours. Right past, through Jersey, New Jersey, and then into Pennsylvania. It'll probably take about 2.5 hours. The issue is that you have to take cattle over. Maybe it's as interesting or not to the viewers, but you got to take cattle over the George Washington Bridge and the Broadsneck Bridge, right? And you got to take them across Bronx Expressway, right? So you have to think about the time that you're moving cattle. You have to think about the weather. You have to think about road noise. There are things that maybe some other producers don't need to think about in getting animals. And even truck drivers that contract to bring animals in, most of them have never been on Long Island.
Those are things that I wouldn't even think about. Of course, I live in Oklahoma. traffic is bad enough in Tulsa, I just skirt around Tulsa. I don't worry about it, you know? So, yeah, that's some aspects that I wouldn't have thought about or considered that other people are faced with.
This is where we got to very early on with some of the people that mentored me. Is there are basic concepts, right? And then those basic concepts definitely need to be adapted to where you're raising the animal, and that's labor, and that's where you're going to get the animals. How is the community going to react to having cattle or lambs or next to them? And it was a little bit different, and it required us to make some changes.
Now, when you got your first cattle there, you leased 20 acres. Did you have to go in and do any infrastructure to get started, or was it pretty well fenced? How was that process?
No, we had to do everything. So we had to put the fence up. We had to construct stock water lines that we use. We're not farmers. So something like plowing and disking and then seeding that wasn't part of the plan, right? So we had to do all of that and learn how to do that. Thankfully, we don't have to do it, but the first time we get to any property, because I don't think any of my team likes to farm very much. It's very hard compared to at least what we believe raising livestock involves. Maybe farmers would think livestock are difficult, but we don't necessarily. But we had to do it all, and we did. And we started slow. We didn't. We wanted to make sure that we were progressing in the right direction every year.
Oh yeah. And when you mentioned water, for instance, are you putting any pipes in so you have water everywhere? You using natural water?
Yeah. So depends on the farm, but as I said before, we lease all the properties. Now they're long-term leases. But what we needed to do is we needed to think about constructing the infrastructure so that it was almost entirely portable. Taking down a high tensile fence or taking off stock water lines or whatever. And so everything that we did was designed to be essentially portable. Maybe that would have been different if we started buying our own properties, but we didn't. So I'll give you for instance, maybe what's a little bit different on our farm is that we don't trench any pipes. We use a material, high-density polyethylene that lays on top of the surface. And so if we needed to come off a property, we could roll that up very quickly. We wouldn't have to dig anything up. And that's what we use, and it works great. High tensile fence and high density polyethylene lines sort of we've gotten really good at that.
On your high density polyethylene pipe, are you able to use that year round, or what challenges does winter provide for you?
So the first maybe 2 winters, we overwintered the herd at an apartment farm upstate, just because I didn't know what was involved in carrying cattle over the winter. It's also very expensive to land hay. We don't cut our own hay; we import it, right? So, but it's expensive to land hay on Long Island. There's nobody growing hay next to us, so we're bringing it in from upstate New York. And one of the things that it was important to me in order to keep my labor year round. I didn't want to have seasonal labor because I just think it's not the contract I wanted to make with the guys. And so we need something to do in the winter. We can keep busy. And so it didn't make sense to overwinter animals at other farms when we had labor. And so, it's funny because I look at it almost every day, which is a geothermal water that we brought in. I think it was a few $1,000s. It's a big investment for us at the time. By the way, it works great, and it works great on Long Island, and it works great in North Dakota. The thing is fantastic. But then I don't know. I think I saw it on an email or my phone somewhere. They sell little nozzles that you put at the end of your stock water lines. Now, when it freezes, it just creates a little drip of water. I think they cost $19. And then all of a sudden, our entire farm for like $100 would have running water anywhere on the farm all winter, and which is fantastic because it allowed us to bale feed in rotation around the farms, because we could put water right next to the animals, and it's fantastic. So I wish I would have known that earlier on. When we use them, we use them quite a bit in the winter.
Yeah, very good. And that's glad to know that it works that well. I've seen the ads, so of course the ads tell me it works well, but
Yeah, for us, because high density polyethylene can freeze and thaw without cracking. And so if you can just keep the water moving just a littlest bit, it works.
oh, very good. Had wondered about that. I know like Plex that they or PEX that they put in houses and stuff can freeze and thaw. And I thought that HDPE would do that, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah, that's great. You can run over it, just not with a plow or a disc, which I've done.
Yeah.
I mean, you can run over with vehicles and stuff. It'll be fine.
What diameter pipe are you using?
We use 1.5 inch on some of the smaller farms, but 1.5 inch on some of the big ones.
So you mentioned earlier everything on your lease farm's portable. So, well, because it's leased land and you have multiple farms, are you moving that pipe each time you move cattle, or do you have enough on the property it just stays there while you have a lease there?
The property runs right underneath what we call our graze lines, which are the semi-permanent internal fencing. Now, before we started running sheep, we had just one single strand line going down the middle of all. The layouts were exactly the same. I mean, the logic was exactly the same. So we didn't have to relearn, anything. Spares that we needed for the stock water or the fencing, could work across any of the properties. And we even, and we use these, I think they've done a business that they're called Pasture Pro, fencing.
Oh, yeah.
And so we, this really is 100% credit goes to a fellow by the name of Jim Garish. But Jim had helped us think through the setup of the farms. So, laying the stock water, spacing of the Pasture Pros to, map out the, spacing would mean that we have, an acre of land between each of the Pasture Pros, so we don't need to stand outside doing that. We could put animals anywhere on property, and today it's within 300 feet they have fresh running water. Moving, the portable troughs takes just a few short minutes. It's very, very slick across all the properties, and so it was that initial sort of work to really think through with someone who had done this hundreds of times, laid out what the infrastructure should look like, what materials to use in fairly, now we can do it. Now we can do it ourselves. Right now we're coming from the property. But the initial thought was done with Jim.
One thing really interesting that you said through there, you have your Pasture Pro post set so that it's an acre whenever you divide your pasture.
Yeah, which allows us, because every morning when we do grazing, we observe the graze from yesterday. We calculate, we know the demand, if you will. We calculate the implied supply that we based on the graze and the residual, and in order to do all that, you need to know exactly, the acreage that the animals were on. It's not like we're measuring that every day. We're just observing between, posts that at one point when we set it up were properly measured.
As you're going through that and you get your system or infrastructure set up and watering, how was finishing cattle on grass? Did you work with Jim on that, and how challenging was that?
The answer is that I work with Jim, yes, as well as others, right? That, in fact, I spent time at the Noble Institute. Yeah, it was great learning a lot about the business. But the concept of just finishing animals, because we're not cow capping, we would never be able to make money. Just that concept, like you will never be able to survive if you cow cap, because of all the factors that some of which I've discussed. That was a discussion that Jim had with me, and that I'd probably be trying to cow camp right now if that's the case. And so very, very different. Then it became, okay, well, what kind of forage do you need in order to finish animals? Because presumably that's going to be different than building bone and muscle, right? Layering fat, has energy demands that are beyond, building bone and muscle. And so, well, how did we seed our pastures relative to someone who was cow calf? So those would be major differences that if I wasn't working with someone that was very knowledgeable there, I would have missed. I mean, hopefully I would have gotten in at this point.
It does take time. Some of us learn slower than others. I have to say I'm guilty of that. So you're getting these cows, you're working or calves and finishing them on grass. Did you have a processor close by? Did you have any trouble finding a processor?
No, we don't have a processor nearby. I mean, we do have to travel quite a bit. Traveling is fine, right? We can do that. It's finding the capacity. That's one. And it's slaughter, but perhaps not something I didn't realize. I always anticipated slaughter would be a big hurdle for us. We were able to find the slaughter. It was a struggle to find the capacity over the years as we've grown. A bigger bottleneck is the co-packing side of the business. To be able to sell, to be able to have the carcass butchered and then in a very, very high quality way, and then packaged in a very, very high quality way. If someone's going to pay the premium that we ask them to pay for products at Acabonac Farms, it's going to be perfect. The cuts have to be perfect. The packaging has to be perfect. There's things that survive endlessly, and their freezer. It's going to survive UPS shipping. Sometimes across the U.S. And so that co-packing capacity, I think, is a bigger hurdle, at least for us, than the slaughter.
And when you got those first animals processed, ready to sell, how did you go about marketing them, and where?
Well, we have a side of the business that's an entirely different business, which is marketing the beef. It's almost got nothing to do with the farming. The skill set that's involved, the investment that's involved, the labor, the team that you need to have in order to keep everything working properly, and then optimizing. Before we started building the front end, the retail side of the business, which is all online on day one. So we were to some extent ready to sell the product online. We received, the first, maybe it was 2 or 5 carcasses back, butchered. The beef didn't taste good. We have great customers, and so they sort of went on that journey with us. Surprisingly, thankfully, I'm a pretty critic. We're getting there, right? In terms of the way I want it to eat. But the online part works. It's just the beef didn't taste so hot.
How do you ensure that your beef has a consistent flavor?
To me, this is everything about the operation. Right. So it's if you're gonna be 100% grass fed, you can't just snap your fingers and have great tasting beef, right? Like you're starting from a standing, stop like we were, right? You over the years, hopefully you're doing the right thing and you're building soil health, right? And then you're building healthier forage, then ultimately, and as you work on sourcing better genetics and get the forage sequences down, you can layer fat more consistently, right? You can, those weight gains will be higher and more consistent, which is absolutely required. But it's not. Again, it's different with grain. I don't know, but if you're true to grass, there's a curve that there's a learning curve, right? There's a development curve, and if you're coming on to, as we are, conventionally farmed soils, that takes time, and time takes money. You just need to be prepared for that. And so when people say, regenerative farming, it's like this is years and years long journey, and we're learning that nature does move, quickly, but not in a matter of a year or two, right? It does take time, and you have to be consistent in the way that you manage the operation ultimately to promote soil health first and foremost, even at the expense of weight gain and product quality. The last thing I'd say, and this was, we didn't want to do it, but I felt like in order to produce a high quality grass fed product more consistently, because you can spend a lot of money to basically acquire a new customer, but if they're not, buying your beef 3, 4, 5 times, you're not making money on that customer. It just costs too much money to get them. And so that, the eating experience, the flavor, and then the tenderness needs to be consistently there over those purchases. And what we didn't want to, but we did, which is invest in irrigation. And, it's transformed, the operation. I mean, it's really been fantastic in terms of, our gains, and also the stress load that we were carrying around whether or not, we were going to hit our slaughter slots, which, we need to book, up to a year in advance, whether the animal's ready or not. And so, you're stressing because, the animal, let's say, is gaining 1.7 pounds a day and needs to gain 2.1 pounds in order to get to the slaughter slot. And it's very stressful, where now that we can, now that we've got, the fencing and the stock water, that operation is all set up. Now with the irrigation, it's allowed us to be much more consistent in terms of the animals that we're bringing to processing.
Moving on from beef cattle just a little bit, you all added pork, lamb, and chicken. What prompted the decision to expand into those species?
I think it varied. I've always wanted to have lamb. We don't use any synthetic fertilizers. We don't use any herbicides, pesticides, fertilizers. Nothing, zero. We do have a compost operation on the farms, but that's it. And then our management of the animals. So we do have weeds, and in particular, some of those weeds, unless we're putting a lot of pressure on the cattle, they won't consume them. So what we were doing is we're saying, well, we want to put more pressure on the animals to graze more uniformly, and then the average daily gains on those animals suffer. And so what we did was we had to bring in the second class, which are the lambs, who do a better job at some of the meatier species. I was watching a group of sheep go out. We have the weed is called mugwort. It's a horrible thing, and they seem to love it. So that made me it makes me happy every time I see them. So that was a lamb. Chickens, we don't have lambs. We just raise meat chicken. That really was because of the seasonality in the beef business. So what we found was, if your labor is there year round, right, and your fixed costs are the year round. If you're not in that barbecue season, then it's a little thin in terms of revenue. And so that we wanted to smooth out some of that seasonality with chicken and pork. So that, and then there's benefit. What we started doing was running the chickens. So those internal fences that we use for rotational grazing, that requires a fair amount of labor. You got to weed whack. You got to maintain that fence line if you want it to be hot. And we've developed a system where basically the chickens are grazing under the high tensile fencing, the internal fencing. It's taking labor out of the equation for us. So we're trying that. I've also found, the last thing I'd say about that is, when someone comes to the website to buy the beef, right, that's great. It's fantastic, but they then go into the supermarket to buy the pork, lamb, and the chicken. And I just thought, that's, and occasionally beef at the supermarket too, right? Because maybe they didn't get the order in, or we were out of stock. And so now they're coming to the website and able to buy, those four big proteins and do it more consistently.
Right. Encouraging that consumer to spend more at your stop rather than going elsewhere to get the rest of their shopping list. Yeah.
I think for us, while you're at our website, you're gonna, the beef is expensive too. I mean, that's just the truth. If you look at the relative costs and what families can afford, and there needs to be a healthy dose of chicken in there.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, when you talked about your sheep a while ago, do you run your sheep with your cattle?
Yeah. What we try to do is we try to, now it's not like this is top 5 on our lists of things that we want from our cow calf producers, but it would be great, right, if they also had lamb on their farms, and now that's pretty much just not the case. And so what we do is we socialize, when we're confirming that everybody respects the hotlines in the corral, we socialize the lambs with the beef things. And what we found is, right, if we're selecting cattle, the number one, we're on Long Island, and I mentioned, right, where our neighbors are a football throw away. So we're selecting for temperament, right? Yes, small frame, grass-fed genetics. Number one is temperament. And so if we've done that right, usually not a problem whatsoever. It's a day or two before, they stop chasing each other, and then it's a week or two before they bonded. And once they bond, they want to be together. In our experience, so.
Now, one thing on that bonding of your calves and your lambs, are you bringing in newly weaned lambs and you're putting them with yearling steers or heifers, and you're finding it takes a couple weeks and they bond pretty good?
They're goofing around together, chasing each other and stuff, but within a week or two, we found that if our internal fences are really hot, so if the sheep can't squirt through the internal fence to the other pasture, then they find a way to get along.
Yeah. Well, I know I've read about bonding lambs with cattle, and especially if you're using weaned lambs or newly weaned lambs, and you're bonding them to cattle less than 18 months old, they bond fairly quick, and it's a fairly strong bond. However, I have not tried it yet, so one day I may give it a try and see how it works.
What we learned was just really get those internal fences hot, and your cattle better than anybody, and so you've got a little naughtiness running through them, or if they're generally relaxed, and if they are, at least in our experience, which is limited, right? But it's been okay.
Yeah, very good. Stephen, before we wrap this up and move on to the famous 4 questions, is there anything else that we didn't cover that you think our listeners would benefit from?
I think we covered a lot. Maybe just emphasize how important it is that you're building those relationships on not only the suppliers, right, to the business, which I think is important. Everything from us boxes to the consultants or mentors to, in particular, the slaughter facility owners and the co-packers. I think it was Cornell. I'm not sure. One of the universities really emphasized how important it is that you figure out ways to allow both of your businesses to succeed. Right, there are things that we can do, simplifying cut sheets, paying our bills on time. Never, if we commit to slots, we fill them. Those help a partner's business, and so we do our best to do it. So I think it goes both ways. Maybe that's something there.
Yeah, and that's excellent advice there. Those relationships and being a good customer, client to them as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very good. Well, Stephen, it is time for our famous 4 questions. Same 4 questions we ask of all of our guests. Our very first question: what is your favorite grazing grass related book or resource?
So there are 2. I think I mentioned Jay Garish. A little secret is that, I think it's still, you can do it, but you certainly were able to do it years ago. You can go to his website and you can download, there's dozens of PowerPoint slides that he's put together where he narrates. So like building fencing, the stock water, thoughts around genetics, every kind of key topic that he'd be interested in, you could pretty much just have him write with your computer. It's fantastic, of course. And then Walt Davis, How Not to Go Broke Ranching. That's the That's to me the big one. And I do read it once a year, and I buy it for everybody on my team.
Yeah, excellent selection there, and Jim Garrish is always a great resource. I enjoy reading that, How to Not Go Broke Ranching. And as you speak of it, I probably should go read it again.
I had an opportunity to study under Walt at the Noble Institute in Oklahoma.
Oh, yes.
Before it passed, yeah, and it was fantastic. It was just really great.
Oh, I imagine so, yes. Our second question, what is your favorite tool for the farm?
We have a morning routine, because if you don't do things in routine, you forget to do them, and then you get in trouble. So, we all kind of carry around a little, I think it's made by Safex, a little handheld fence voltage reader. In terms of the tool, the other one is it's a little flip box cutter, but you don't know what's in your pocket. You can clip it on. It's always there. It's always sharp. It doesn't get in the way. It's exactly what at least I need. So those, I won't start the day without those two.
Oh, yes, very good selections, yes. Thirdly, what would you tell someone just getting started?
Consider the class of livestock you start with. You want to, that life, the cycle of life. The shorter it is, the more immediate the sale, the better, right? In terms of cash flow. That's one. Beef, I think, is a tough one to start with. That's one. Two, you probably spend a lot more money than you think. So make sure you've got, money in the reserve, because you're gonna need it. Especially if you're truly gonna be, going down the regenerative journey, because it's not like you're gonna have perfect finishing quality pasture the first season. It's gonna take 4 or 5 years in order to to start being able to finish on that. At least that's my experience. So be patient.
Excellent advice. And Stephen, where can others find out more about you?
So we just revamped. We tried to revamp the website in the winter, so we're actually starting to map that out. But we put a lot more information on our website, acabonacfarms.com, which goes into sort of our approach to soil health, and then our approach to managing animals, and our approach to partnering with the community in terms of supporting our business and what we do and why we do it. So it's a good place I think to go and learn more about us.
Wonderful. And we will put links to your website as well as your social media in our show notes. Stephen, thank you for hopping on here and sharing with us today. We appreciate it.
No, thank you very much. I enjoyed it, and it was a pleasure speaking to you. And I wish you continued success with the podcast.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. You're listening to the Grazing Grass Podcast, helping grass farmers learn from grass farmers. And every episode features a grass farmer and their operation. If you've enjoyed today's episode and want to keep the conversation going, visit our community at community.grazinggrass.com. Don't forget to follow and subscribe to the Grazing Grass Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube for past and future episodes. We also welcome guests to share about their own grass farming journey. So if you're interested, fill out the form on grazinggrass.com under the Be Our Guest link. Until next time, keep on grazing grass.